Good morning, everyone. My name is John Heerdink, and welcome to our TriPublic CEO presentation titled Hard to Swallow, an Underdiagnosed Condition Rising to Surface, EOE, which will be co-hosted by James A. Helliwell M.D., CEO of Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals, NASDAQ. EPRX is its ticker symbol. Eupraxia is a clinical stage biotechnology company focused on the development of locally delivered extended release products that have the potential to address therapeutic areas with unmet medical need. The company strives to provide improved patient benefit and has developed technology designed to deliver targeted, long-lasting activity with fewer side effects. As many of you know, I am the managing member of TriPublic. Our website is tribepublic.com, TriPublic.com. Members from 31 plus countries and all 50 states have joined TriPublic freely to gain direct corporate access to leaders and experts that they care about via our webinar events and via our 36 venue sites located across the US, from San Francisco to Philly and back, where we host in-person luncheon, dinner, and speaking engagements with local tribe members and help build communities across the US. Tribe members, furthermore, are invited to submit names of experts and leaders of industry via our free wish list process at our website, adding names of companies and subjects that span across all sectors and subjects so that they can learn more. Please note that I'm also the managing director of Vista Partners, LLC, a registered investment advisory firm in California, and its website is vistapglobal.com. Please review both sets of disclaimers at each site and know that I'm currently a shareholder and advisor to Eupraxia. I would also like to thank you for all participating and for all the questions you've sent in previously through our email at research@tribepublic.com. And remind you that during this event, you may also send in more questions that come to mind via our Zoom chat feature, and look forward to seeing those as well. Thanks again for sending in the questions to date. I would also like to thank Eupraxia for joining us today, and James Helliwell, who has an accomplished background and is a gentleman that I hope that you all enjoy meeting via this webinar, and also hopefully can meet at one of our events across the US in the near future. Now let's get started. Hi, James. Could you also tell us just a little about yourself prior to beginning your presentation, and then just proceed as follow. We'll do this about 15-20-minute presentation and then 5-2-minute Q&A, and try to get a quick, efficient event completed today, and then we'll seek to get this video of this event published at the TriPublic YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining us.
Great, John, thank you very much. And thank you to all the tribe members who are here today. A little bit of background on myself. So I'm a physician by background, a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist, and I spent my clinical career of a little over a decade doing heart transplants and artificial heart work and critical care. So a really fascinating practice. And it was during that practice that I recognized just how important precision was. And so today what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what we do. And I really want to introduce everybody to this disease, eosinophilic esophagitis, and explain it and talk about its very rapid growth that we're seeing, and then a solution that we believe we have, which is showing some really compelling data, which we'll walk through. So hopefully by the end of the next 20 minutes, people will have a very good idea, and then we can answer some questions. So when I was doing heart transplants, one of the critical things, and apologies, I went a little too quickly through the forward-looking statements, please. So please feel free to look at this on our website as well if you want to see that in detail. So one of the things that I recognized in the operating room and in the critical care environment is that precision matters. So it means that you need to deliver the right drug into the tissues where you want it, not into the tissues that you don't, at the dose that you want it for the time that you want it. You may think that that is standard, that is how drugs deliver. In fact, it's very much not how drugs deliver. Most drugs that you take will go to every cell in your body, and they will go there with a big burst and then a logarithmic decline, meaning that they fall off very, very quickly. What we have designed here and have really well patented around the world with a whole host of families of patents is this diffusphere technology. It allows us to package a drug have it placed directly into the tissue where over a long period of time, it will deliver drug to the tissues that need it and not to the ones that don't. You can see here a picture of the esophagus, because what we're going to be talking about today is a disease called eosinophilic esophagitis. We'll call it EOE for short. That little pink picture that you see there is actually a picture of an eosinophil. An eosinophil is a white blood cell, a kind of white blood cell that basically is like a little allergic cell. What's happening is when they exist in the esophagus, it says that you essentially are a sensitive individual to external stimuli, which can be all sorts of different things, from foods to environmental allergens, and that what that will do is then make you get inflammation. That inflammation turns into swelling, turns into scar tissue, and this disease is really well known for being difficult to swallow, painful to swallow, and food can actually get stuck. It is very often misdiagnosed as heartburn, reflux, very early in the disease. It's very similar to asthma. So when we think about asthma, we think about it as this inflammatory disease where you get wheezy and it's difficult to breathe. This is exactly the same thing, except for it's in your esophagus or where the food goes down. And what happens is that it becomes progressive over time, and it is relentlessly progressive to the point that then you get where your esophagus, and when you look at these pictures here, this is looking at an esophagus and looking at all the different things that can essentially happen here. What you'll notice when you look at some of these is some of them have tears, some of them are very, very narrow, some of them have very thick rings. This is what this disease starts to look like in your esophagus. And so, again, as it progresses, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Now, you're probably thinking, I haven't heard of this disease before. It must be very, very rare. Well, it was considered very rare for quite a long period of time. When I went through medical school, this didn't even pop up on our radar. We were not diagnosing patients with this disease. It did not mean it didn't exist. It means we did not know what to look for. What you can see from this slide I have in front of you is just how incredibly rapidly, over the last couple of decades, this disease has grown. And so it's gone from, around 150,000 patients in the US as recently as, 2020 to north of 500,000 patients today, in the prediction of being well north of 1 million in 2026. You can see when you look in the middle part here that it is predominantly male, but females are catching up very rapidly. And also, this is a disease that can affect you throughout your lifespan. So this can hit pediatric patients, adolescent patients, and adults. But we do tend to see that middle-aged cohort as being the one where the disease really comes up. When it really comes up, a lot of the time, it's actually that you've had it for a long time. And so people will say, I've noticed that food would seem to get stuck. It was difficult. I started to drink more water. I started to chew more. I started to have more soups. That's really, really common that prior to diagnosis, people are modifying their habits. When the disease gets really bad, people do even more than that. They start to modify their entire life. They avoid social events. Think of how much of your life revolves around eating with friends, with family. And what happens is you can't do that. And you can't because as this disease progresses, food will actually get stuck, and stuck to the degree of it's not just there for 2-3 minutes, but it feels like you're having a heart attack. You have this terrible pain, and it is blocking your esophagus. So nothing can go up and down, no food and no water. And a lot of these patients are then heading to the emergency room. What is really, really remarkable is there was a study done fairly recently. There were 700,000 people or a few more who went to the emergency department in the US with this difficulty swallowing and food stuck. And this 700,000 was only looking at men. So in other words, we know that this really is this is north of 1 million patients. Yet only 50,000 of those patients actually had a diagnosis of EOE. But what we know is that if we actually were to go and look at the remainder of those patients, a majority of them probably actually have EOE. So in other words, when you look at the growth of this disease, it is growing really, really rapidly. So it's important. Part of our goal is to actually be educating people about this disease. There was an amazing article in the New York Times called The Mystery of My Burning Esophagus. It was an opinion piece written by, or an article written by a fellow who had 10 years of suffering, bouncing around through doctors before he finally got to a diagnosis. Now, here's the really hard part. When you do get to a diagnosis, now your journey starts again. So first off, you need to go for an endoscopy to get the diagnosis. So I showed you pictures of an esophagus earlier. That's from when they put the camera down in the esophagus. Now, they will put this down once a year as the standard to follow the progression of the disease. But you actually need to get even more of those to monitor your treatment depending on how you're being treated. So you need an endoscopy for diagnosis. You need it once a year. You can try diet elimination as treatment. It is very difficult to comply with and doesn't tend to have a high success rate. Off-label oral steroid therapy is used. That still needs endoscopic follow-up as you're trying to do that. It is very difficult to take. It's twice a day. You can't eat or drink afterwards. And a very large percentage of patients actually end up with fungal infections or thrush in their mouth. So the discontinuation rate is very, very high. When we look at all of the treatments available, there's recent data just published just a couple of weeks ago that shows that only 34% of patients are compliant with their medications. The best medicine that's come to market in EOE, and is really the only medicine that's on label and approved for this drug, is a drug called Dupixent. You've probably seen TV ads for this, and the TV ads for this are usually for breathing disorders like asthma or COPD, or for atopic dermatitis or eczema. In EOE, you have to take it twice as often as for those other things. It costs about $100,000 a year. And in their phase 2 study, where they looked at the rate of clinical remission, so the number of patients who really got better, it was 39%. So this has been a big change in a positive direction for patients, but we believe when we listen to patients and listen to doctors that there's a need to be able to actually do better. You'll see the size of this market is growing, and there's such a strong need there that we talked to the top doctors in this space. We showed them our technology, what I showed you earlier, and said, we can deliver, we believe, fluticasone propionate, which is one of the steroids they use to treat this disease, but they don't have an effective way of delivering it. Remember, these patients are going for an endoscopy, which means they're getting an anesthetic, they're having the camera put down for an analysis. While they're doing the biopsies and the pictures, it's very easy for them to take a couple of extra minutes and actually deposit drug by injection just into the esophagus. And patients don't feel this, just like they don't feel the biopsies being taken. So it's fast, it's easy, and you don't have to worry about compliance because it's being performed by the doctor. So we're in the middle of a study right now, and we've got some data to share with you that we hope will bring hope to patients who have this disease. So first thing is, we've been giving this, and remember we talked about this ability to deliver drugs in a very flat and stable way. Well, here is data showing injections, and you can see our sort of longest follow-up, and we're going to continue to follow these patients, so there'll be more and more. Here you can see the drug levels from a single injection series at day 0, 9 months later, 9 months, patients are still getting the drug in the tissues in an absolutely stable fashion. Imagine the blood pressure pill you might take, a cholesterol pill you might take, a pain pill you might take, something that you need to take every day or twice a day. Imagine if you only needed to take it once a year. That's what this data is suggesting might be possible with this treatment. So that's the drug and how it's delivering. Let's actually look at the impact it's having on patients. What this is looking at is a score that measures how well patients are doing in feeling, so their symptoms. What you can see here is that across our latest 3 cohorts, our highest doses as we're going up, that we're seeing that 100% of the patients, by the time they get to 6 months in follow-up, have achieved clinical remission. And all the way to 9 months, just like the drug delivery, patients are remaining in clinical remission. Really important. This really sets up, this is a once-a-year injection, is what we believe this data is telling us. In addition to that symptom data, what we can see here is long-term changes to the tissues themselves. As we go up in dose, the tissues on biopsy under a microscope are showing that they're getting better. They're going from diseased and traveling in the direction towards normal. And that is maintaining all the way to 9 months. So we're seeing this here in the grade or the severity of the disease, measured again by that biopsy, and also the extent of the disease throughout the esophagus. And again, maintaining that all the way to 9 months, incredibly important and transformational for patients. We talked about eosinophils, those white blood cells. We're also reducing those on biopsy. So we can see right under the microscope that we are actually getting rid of these eosinophils and doing that. And this is a big part of why the tissues are getting better, why the patients are feeling better, is across the board, we are making things better for patients in a very, very meaningful way. At the same time, we are providing safety. So we have had 0 patients. I talked about this oral candidiasis, the thrush that you normally get from steroids. We are not seeing that in any of our patients. Patients are not having drug-related adverse events. The only thing that people are reporting in this trial that is related to anything is really related to the procedure itself. So they're getting this sore throat that lasts 24 to 48 hours. As you can imagine, there's a lot of data on this. And if you've ever had an endoscopy, you know your throat didn't feel good for about a day or so because they were moving this sort of tube up and down your throat for about half an hour. When we look at all of the laboratory measures, this is incredibly safe and well tolerated. So overall, when we look at this, hopefully what you're seeing here is not just a disease that is growing very, very rapidly. There's a huge patient need. And hopefully what you're seeing from this data is that we are in this phase 2 program. We look to be finishing this phase 2 program as we move through into 26, but we have data coming at least every quarter. So there are a huge number of catalysts where we can check in and see just how well we are treating these patients, how meaningful a medication we believe this has the possibility to be, to the point that it may even be the first-line treatment for this disease, as has been suggested by some of the top physicians in this field after they've looked at the data and publicly commented on it. So overall, we believe that for patients, we've got a great solution, and for investors, we've got a real opportunity. A little bit about the company and our cap table. So right now, we have $27.5 million in cash on hand. That takes us through the study that I was just showing you data from, as well as a randomized controlled trial that begins very shortly and will run through the rest of 25 and the early part of 2026. This cash takes us through to Q3 of 2026. So we do not have a need for cash at the present time and can execute on all the things that we just talked about on this call. You can see our market capitalization is around $150 million. We believe that that really represents an incredible value and entry opportunity based on the size of opportunity that's in front of us with EOE. But also, if you think about it, the capability of our platform and what it can do outside of EOE. And with that, what I'll do is I'll stop there and just see if there's questions. And again, really appreciate everybody's time and attention.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's fascinating. And one of the things that we've done, as you reminded me, is as we've gone out in some of these events across the country and I believe specifically Dallas, we are educating part of what this process is about and connect around the community to help people understand. And you've had people come forward during the events or after the events and said, "Hey, I think I might have this. Can we address that?" Can you speak to that and just a little bit? Obviously, not sharing names, but just that process and why that's important.
It has been absolutely remarkable. I mean, if in theory there are only a million patients in the United States with this disease, the number of times that I've been with you, John, out with others and meeting people, and they either have EOE, their relative has EOE, or and just as you're describing, people have come up to me after a talk, asked to email me. We email and they tell me their symptoms, and I say you should go see a gastroenterologist. They come back and say, I was diagnosed with EOE. And they've been going for years with these symptoms. And so it really is, I think, much more common than what the data and the billing literature tell you that it is. And so we believe there's a real opportunity here to be able to educate patients so they get diagnosed and ideally sort of have the treatment. And again, when we look at this treatment, one of the things that I think that for people to be able to understand is people are already going for an endoscopy. We are adding 3 to 4 minutes of procedure time to that endoscopy. It's very simple for the physician to do. They do this sort of thing all the time for other reasons. And so these are injections that are very simple. It's 3 to 4 minutes added on to a half-hour procedure, and really delivers such what we believe is a strong benefit for patients.
Well, you just answered one of the questions. How long does it take for the treatment to take? So thank you.
Of course.
Here's a couple other questions from one of our Newport Beach friends that we've met this year. He says, does diet alter the speed of the advancement?
So diet usually won't make it worse unless diet and a food allergy is the reason for your EOE. It does seem to be diet elimination doesn't work for most people. Many people will try it. It is very difficult to actually eliminate a lot of these foods. But if you find, for example, dairy is what does this for you, which it is for a small number of people, then getting rid of diet will slow the advancement of the disease. But in general, we don't actually find the cause. And so that's why these treatments are just so necessary.
Okay. The follow-up question is, does EOE lead to Barrett's esophagus?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So for those on the call who don't know what Barrett's esophagus is, the cause is not EOE. It is usually from heartburn, so reflux. And what happens is lots of acid. The stomach is designed to hold acid, contain it, and can tolerate it. The esophageal tissue can't actually tolerate that. And so what happens is the acid goes up, it bathes the esophagus, and it creates all this fibrosis and scar tissue. And that can actually lead to cancer, and can lead to narrowing and strictures. Very interestingly, with the results that we are getting in the esophagus for EOE, we're having doctors coming to us and saying, we think we could use this to treat Barrett's esophagus. That Barrett's esophagus treatment, we may actually be able to slow the progression of the disease. Could it possibly stop the cancer and stop people having to have esophageal surgery? That's what some of the doctors are coming to us and suggesting. Naturally, we would have to explore that in a study, but we believe, again, it represents a real opportunity to provide positive impact to patients and expand the market very significantly.
Thank you, James. Here's another one. Could you comment on the potential placebo effect observed in the data to date, given the open label design? And then additionally, how did the placebo effect manifest in the Dupixent trials for context?
Yeah, so really great question. So what I walked you through was 3 different things. So the patient's symptom score, so that SDI, and where we saw 100% of patients achieve clinical remission during the study period. I also looked at 2 different biopsy measures, so the EOE HSS and the eosinophil count. Now, those biopsy measures, there really is no placebo effect. There is no placebo response to the cellular structure of the esophagus. So that data doesn't matter that it's an open label design. It is just absolutely straight, no placebo response there. On the patient symptom side of things, we see a range in the Dupixent trial, the EOE trial, and some trials that have been published in the literature on off-label products. And it tends to be this kind of 5 to 15% placebo response. But the placebo response doesn't tend to be really intense. In other words, not many people, while they may feel better, not many of them actually get to clinical remission. And so that's why that's a really important point, because we see a very strong separation from what the literature shows. Now, you absolutely want to see and do a placebo-controlled trial, and we are beginning that this summer, towards the latter part of the summer. And so that will simply add to this database and continue to reinforce it. So hopefully that answers the question. Great question.
Thanks again, James. Here's a couple more here. Why is the prevalence of EOE rising so quickly?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And there's really two pieces to it. One of it is that we are actually looking for and diagnosing the disease. So I think very early in this disease, the diagnosis was happening really late. So you showed up in an emergency room, food was stuck, you got an emergency referral to a gastroenterologist, they took the food out, you had this very tight esophagus, they took biopsies and said, oh, you have EOE. That's like diagnosing cancer at stage 4. Imagine the cancer numbers, if we only diagnosed at stage 4, they'd be really small. Instead, we screen for cancer. We look for people's symptoms. We have screening programs. So now the numbers are larger because we're looking much earlier and we're catching it earlier. It's exactly what's happening in EOE. People are becoming educated, both patients and doctors, and they're saying, if you have these symptoms, let's look earlier. So that's one of the big things. The other is the disease actually is growing. In other words, more people as a percentage of the population are actually developing this disease. That's a harder question to answer. It's the same as, why are more people getting asthma? Why are more people sort of getting these allergic responses? Physicians debate what the cause is. The answer is, we hear things of environmental allergens, what may be in the water, to, is it dishwasher tabs, or, the answer is, I don't know. And I don't think that we actually know when we see the literature. But it certainly is rising.
Thank you. And then why choose, here's another, how does your delivery technology ensure such precise delivery and long duration?
Yeah, so what it is that when we place these particles, and these particles are about the size of a grain of sand, and so we place them in the local tissue. So we have an osteoarthritis asset, so it's treating osteoarthritis, where we inject into the joint, and it delivers into the joint over time. We also, in this case, are delivering directly into the esophagus. So we're in that tissue delivering a very high concentration with almost nothing getting out into the body. Now, here's what's really interesting. So we have, both in the esophagus and in the joint, measured the local tissue concentrations. So in other words, we actually take biopsies and we know, or we sample fluids, so we know the drug that's in the local tissue. There's a very sort of fixed ratio of, it's about 2 log units. So about 100 times difference between what's in the tissue and what's in the serum or the plasma. And that's really important, because then what it means is, when we look at I showed you the sort of plasma levels. So it tells us 2 things. It is telling us what's happening in the tissue, because we know that ratio from the studies we've done. And number 2, it also tells us that the really low concentrations that are hitting all the other cells are why we are able to have such a high safety profile. And so the technology, then, you can imagine, if we can do this in the esophagus and we can do this in the joint, what about cancer? Can we deliver chemotherapy directly into a tumor and not have to hit every other healthy cell and get all the side effects associated with that?
Makes sense. James, switching to gears a little bit to the stock side again. Remember, this Eupraxia trades on the NASDAQ and the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol EPRX. Quick question for you: you've got a great deal of cash that's got towards you the runway. One, how did you get that? And two, w- with that, have you had any interest from the analyst community? And are there any price targets out there from any of these analysts? And can you point some of our tribe members to that research?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we've been very lucky with a very strong group of experienced investors. So we've got some small healthcare institutions, and at the same time, we've got just a lot of family offices with a lot of expertise who've come in. Our last round was led by a gentleman who's now on our board, Joseph Friedman. His bio is there. What you'll notice is he was the co-head of private equity for Brookfield Asset Management, so deeply experienced, and really did an incredible amount of work and understood, what he was getting into, and understanding both the assets as well as the platform. You'll see the analysts share a lot of that sentiment. So Gary Nachman, for Raymond James, he publishes on us. He has a $12 US price target. And there are some recent notes on the back of data release, which just occurred last week. And then Albert Lowe at Craig-Hallum also publishes on us, also has a $12 price target, also has some new publications too in the last week on the back of fresh data and a key opinion leader event, which occurred at the end of last week, which is also available on our website should people wish to view that. So, you know, we obviously can't predict the stock market or anything like it, but when we look at our data, and we listen to what the analysts are saying, we certainly believe that there's a lot of opportunity for growth, given the size of the markets that we're addressing, the fashion in which we're addressing them, and the cash that we have on hand to execute on delivery of milestones.
With that being said, with the size of the market, is it safe to assume at this late stage that you're in with EOE, or this later stage that you're in with EOE, that are you getting any interest from big pharma, or is this something you're looking to take to the market yourself, or how do you look at
Yeah.
it?
So it's a really great question. So the answer is yes, there's a lot of incoming interest on the back of the data that we've released. The way that we look at this is outside of the United States, we would certainly look to partner that with an expert who commercializes in those jurisdictions. But within the US, this is a very highly specialized sales force, very small, not a heavy commercial lift, and certainly something that we could square up to, and really to the advantage of shareholders.
Got it. One other question that just popped in, it says, would it be relevant to assess local steroid concentrations via biopsy over time? Why is serum measurement sufficient?
Yeah. So when we look at that, and that gets back to a little bit of when I was talking about the technology. So we've certainly done a lot of biopsies to look at local tissue concentrations. Obviously, we want to be as invasive as little as possible. So once we establish a very clear pattern between the ratio of what's happening in the tissue and what's happening in the plasma or the serum, we now no longer need to be always assessing it in the steroid, because we can use as a surrogate, because we've established that data pattern. We can use the plasma as a surrogate. Great question, though.
Follow-up question on the business side of it says,
Yeah.
what is the earliest you'd anticipate, generating any form of revenue? But also, can you also summarize the key upcoming catalysts for the next 12 months?
Absolutely. So in terms of revenue generation, there's really two ways a company like us generates revenue. One of them is through transactions with pharma companies who are getting your rights for jurisdictions, for example. Those deals are very difficult to call in timing, and I don't want to do that. But we can think of those as nearer term. And then the longer term would be revenue generation on sales, which we would anticipate seeing towards the latter part of 2028, early 29. But again, there are an incredible number of catalysts that are really value driving in the near term and the midterm. So first off, at least every quarter. So in September, we are going to have a very significant data release from this ongoing trial. We're going to have another data release towards the latter part of the year. And then we're going to have multiple data releases through 2026 of the current trial. And then in addition, we're starting this randomized control trial That will also be reading out in mid-2026. We will then have an end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA, which will be a very, very important catalyst, and then the launch of the phase 3 program shortly after that. So when we look at the next 12 to 18 months, and even sort of 6 months in the short term, a lot of catalysts of clinical data, advancement of the program, and then there's the opportunity for other catalysts to come in as other programs may launch, or business development transactions may occur.
Well, James, we've had you on here for quite some time this morning, and I do appreciate as well as all the tribe members that have joined us and the great questions that have surfaced. Fascinating, and congratulations on the progress to date. Excited to see what might happen over the next 12 months, even and beyond, as you develop this company. Just a reminder to all the tribe members that we will have this event video published at the Tribe Public YouTube channel, hopefully later today. So if you want to pass it on or review any of the topics that were shared on this video on this event, then you can do so at your leisure. Again, James, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to having you out at some of our live events across the country. Remember, if you want to see James live, you have to send in and express your interest in seeing him come out to one of your cities to host one of these events. We're currently targeting Beverly Hills, I believe Seattle, San Francisco, and a few others. And we look forward to seeing you there if you're in those areas. And if you're not, please tell us if you want to see him, and we'll see if James can consider fitting it into his very busy schedule to get out to help inform you and help build your communities. Again, James, thanks so much for your time today, and I wish you great success as you move forward.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all the tribe members, and look forward to seeing you out in your locations. And thank you for taking the time today, and John for hosting. Thank you.
All the best.
Take care. Bye-bye.